Okay, so welcome to this week's special episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
And I'm Jamie.
And this is the first in a series that we are running with Jumpstart. Jumpstart are a startup matching service that get cool people into cool startups. I've had quite a lot of interaction with them in the past. I think they're brilliant, and we wanted to bring them on the pod and do this special series to showcase the amazing work that they do and some of the amazing people that get jobs through them. So very Path Less Chosen, and today we have on Immy, and Immy works for the Dream Factory, but actually got her job before the Dream Factory through Jumpstart, and she will say it kickstarted her into getting into a career she absolutely loved. So can't wait to get Immy on. Jamie, what can we expect from today's episode?
Yeah, plenty to expect again. I mean, firstly, Immy is a content strategist for Dream Factory. I'm not even sure what that is, so we're obviously going to find that out. But there's a few things that we're going to get into. Firstly, how money tempted her into a job to begin with that she then hated and how she then moved on from that. Secondly, how to understand a brand like it's your best friend. And finally, what it's actually like to work for a startup.
Spot on. Sounds like a great episode. Looking forward to getting into it.
Thank you so much for coming on, Immy. I think first question might throw you in the deep end a little bit, but when we had our conversation with Jumpstart about who they would recommend to get on the podcast, you were one of the first names they mentioned. So what we want to know is why do you think they recommended you, and why do you think they thought you'd be a good guest for us?
That's such a good question. I don't know, maybe because I'm just quite keen when it comes to Jumpstart. Like, I just put my hand up for everything. From my perspective, I worked in recruitment before I spoke with Jumpstart. Was working in recruitment for quite a while, and then transitioned into a sales role. And I was so I was the first sales cohort as well, for context, of Jumpstart. So it was just quite an unusual background to come from. I hadn't just newly graduated. I'd been working for almost 2 years and then transitioned into sales. But maybe it's just because I'm always talking to Emily and trying to get involved in all the community events where possible. So, but that's a massive compliment, and thank you for having me on as well.
No, not a problem at all. It's amazing to have you on. We're looking forward to getting into your journey as well as Jumpstart. So take us through the start part where you were working in recruitment and you looked for another job and going to Jumpstart. How did they play a role there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I, like I say, had been in recruitment for 2 years, coming up to 2 years, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And one of my mates had just got a job through Jumpstart, and it's like a New Year's party. I think New Year's resolutions were coming up, and I was so unhappy in my job and didn't know what the next step was going to be. And he pitched Jumpstart to me, signed up, and saw that was their first sales cohort. And I knew that I wasn't necessarily that experienced on the ops side or the generalist side, and never even considered really becoming a founder, whereas sales was calling my name a little bit more. Yes, signed up and but went from there really. I think my mate was really annoyed though, because I didn't put him down as a reference, and so he didn't get his referral fee. But apart from that, that's kind of how I fell into Jumpstart.
Yeah, I mean, in the nicest way possible. I'm glad you said that you were unhappy in the previous job, because that's what this podcast is all about. And we imagine quite a lot of people that are listening because they're maybe unhappy in what they're doing now. So maybe just go, if you don't mind, into a bit more detail about what you were doing before and what was it that was making you unhappy.
So I graduated university, and I thought, it was during COVID as well, so I thought I wanted to go into events, and that was like the one thing that wasn't happening, right? Because you had to be socially distanced. So my brother worked in recruitment. He seemed to be doing quite well at it, and just thought, okay, why not? I just need to get a job. And it was just incredibly tough. It's to anyone that works in recruitment, I take it for an extended period of time, I take my hat off to you, because the expectation, the highs and lows are like nothing I'd ever come across and nothing I've worked in since. And also, I think recruitment sometimes has quite a bad reputation. So you're talking to a lot of people, and 80% of the time they just don't really want to engage with you. So there's a lot of rejection and long hours. And I think in recruitment it's known as like champagne and razors. So the highs are like incredibly high, and then obviously the lows are really low, because you're also in charge of your own business, you're in charge of your own income. So if you have like an absolute stinker of a month, you don't know what you're getting from paycheck to paycheck, and there's nowhere else to rely. Like, it's quite entrepreneurial in that regard. So yeah, it was just an incredibly hard role, and the culture was quite intense as well of the place that I was working. it just took its toll. I'd done it for 18 months nearly, and I just kind of couldn't hack it anymore. I think I was just quite burnt out. So yeah, that was mainly why.
Yeah, I can fully understand that. I've got quite a few mates that worked in recruitment and have either left already or they're on the verge of leaving already, and it's only been less than 2 years, I guess, for some of them. So I guess it kind of begs the question: why did you ever go into the recruitment stuff in the first place? I know we chatted off air about the fact that maybe school pushed you down certain routes with careers and stuff, but why recruitment if it's got this reputation?
I think I saw the money that's possible to make in it. Like, you can make really, really good money, and my brother still works in recruitment, and he's incredibly good at it. I wasn't necessarily blessed with the gift of the gab that perhaps he has.
Immy, could I just push you on the numbers, because I think it's really cool. Like, I'm not asking for but like a rough estimate of what sort of money you can make in recruitment.
I suppose basically how it works is like you do it's like a reverse income tax bracket. So your first X amount is just to cover the cost of the company employing you, and then if you start billing over a certain amount, you get 10% of that, and if you start billing more than that, you get 20% up to 50%. And there were some people in my company that were billing like $1 million, 1 million a year. So if you're getting kind of a percentage chunk of that, I mean, the numbers are unfathomable. I never saw other people's paychecks, but a few of my mates that are still in there are sort of like 200, 300 grand a year, like the top billers. So there's big money in it, but it's also not overnight success. I think one thing about perhaps my expectations were I'd seen how well my brother had done at it. Some people come in and they do their first deal in their first month. It took me 6 months to do my first deal, and then it took me another 3 months to do my next deal. And because you're dealing with people that are like, it's their livelihoods, it's their careers, it's how they're going to feed their family, the emotion tied to that is so intense, because you're calling these people every day, asking them their most important questions, what impact it's going to have on their family, where they want to take their life. It took me a really long time to get going, and then once I got going, when the penny drops, it all suddenly clicked into place, and I started doing quite well. But yeah, it's a real emotional roller coaster, and for me, long term, the money was just not worth it. It was not worth it in any way, shape, or form. So that's why I fell into it. But yeah, I remember. I'm not sure my school would have been too glad that I went straight out of university into recruitment. I think they all wanted us to be, back to your previous question, Jamie, they wanted us all to sort of cure cancer or like be the next like leading human rights lawyer and things like that. So, yeah, that probably wasn't necessarily on the cards for my career as advisor at school.
Yeah, so interesting. I think I remember at school and uni there are certain careers that people sometimes like turn their nose up, and it's almost so ironic to Jamie and I that the people who turn their nose up at the careers are also the people that we know fundamentally don't enjoy what they're doing, but because the biggest part of their career that they get is this ego pride thing from other people, they then look at other people who are not doing those jobs and look down on them. It's like, well, why are you talking about a career like pride and cool careers, but actually like you don't enjoy what you're doing?
100%. There's such like you say, you've hit the nail on the head. There's such an ego thing behind it, and I'm so grateful that I did recruitment because it's definitely set me up for everything else I did. But yeah, I've definitely had like, oh, what, you work in recruitment, or what, you couldn't get anything else, and just thinking. Like, and there were points in that time when I worked in it that I really, really enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun. But there's this sort of, I think people just think you cold call and then you live this like really lavish lifestyle, and it's such hard graft, and it's not necessarily represented in the most realistic way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess your dislike towards it and the kind of like pains and stress that you went through made it a lot easier. But talk to us a little bit, just because people listening are always wondering, how do you take that step to then actually go and find something that you enjoy? So talk to us like how your like mindset was, how you kind of approached it and came to terms with the fact that, right, I'm going to take a little leap and I'm going to go and do something I actually like doing.
Yeah, I think so. When I did work in recruitment, like I said earlier, it's very entrepreneurial. You're in charge of your own desk. You're in charge of your own day to day. The only person that's going to like impact whether you earn money or not is yourself. You can't. Your managers can train you, but their expectation is that you're in charge of your destiny, right? And that really, really appealed to me. And I was still really unsure of what I wanted to do. I didn't know. Felt like it might have been creative, but but I wasn't sure. So the startup world was something that really, really appealed to me, that entrepreneurial spirit of like, if there's a problem, you get the opportunity not only to solve it, but you also get that reward at the end that it hasn't necessarily been handed to you on a plate. Not saying obviously that's with all corporates, but I'd worked in a slightly corporate environment that was very entrepreneurial. So the bit that appealed to me was that entrepreneurial side of things, and I also was very interested in with my degree. I'd studied entrepreneurial like psychology and things like that with my degree, and it just kind of came looping back. So then at that New Year's Eve party where my mate was like, just check it out. They Jumpstart have this thing where they just get 30 startups to pitch to you. I was thinking, this sounds awesome, like this sounds so cool. So that's kind of where I made the leap. And then I went and got a job at a company called Near Street. They were just amazing. Like, they're such an amazing company. They're one of the best cultures I've ever come across. The reason I was drawn to them is my recruitment background was in software engineering, software engineers and working within the tech space. They were a tech company, but related to marketing, related to retail. So it was like this perfect amalgamation of thinking, I want to work for a startup. It's got an area of like the tech side that I can understand and I can talk about. But then also there's that marketing creative side, and the cherry on top was working for an incredible company with such amazing people. So that's kind of how I made that shift into the next step, really.
Yeah, so cool. I'd like to push on the thing you talk about, the amazing culture, because I think a lot of people listening to this will hear almost every single company talk about amazing culture, and it's like everyone says we've got a great culture, but what does that actually mean? Because I think the startup definition of amazing culture is completely different from this broad corporate term of culture.
That's really good question. I think the emotional intelligence that the company had, they had amazing benefits. I'm not going to lie, like they were really, really generous with the opportunity. The two key things were your own personal and professional development. Things like 360 feedback. I'd not even heard of that before I came to Near Street, and the founders made sure they were part of that 360 feedback, and you could pull people for one-to-ones all the time. We'd ask me anything lunches every month, where literally you could ask about the state of the company. What does that look like? What does that look for like our future? We were so educated on where the company was and what the next steps were going to be. And then the emotional intelligence of just like, if you weren't happy, you weren't about something, or you felt like something else could have been done better, there was no fear of like talking about it or pulling the founders to the side, or things were definitely actioned with an amazing action plan. Honestly, I sound like I'm trying to like pitch this company, but they were just super open and very, very kind as well. I'd come from an environment that, how do I put this, it was very cutthroat, and there were a lot of expectations and was very male dominated. And then to move into this sort of place where they really cared about your personal development and where you wanted your career to go. And that's kind of then how I got into content creation, because Near Street supported me through Condé Nast qualification in content creation. So there was always this conversation of, yes, you're in tech sales, but where do you actually want to take your career?
I think that's really interesting, like in terms of like next steps, and actually being in that culture is so important, like an environment that actually supports people to explore other options and also like develop themselves while they're doing it, right? So how long were you there for, and then what was the kind of next steps to then going into doing what you're doing now?
So I was at Near Street for a year, and that was a massive education piece as well. And looping back to what I said earlier about the open communication and explaining what was happening, I was very blessed that as soon as I joined Near Street, they went through an entire sales restructure, and there was a massive restructure within the business, and it was such an education piece, and they were definitely educated on us on how and why they were doing it. And then I just basically used to walk past Dream Factory every day, so they were only like 100 metres down the road from each other, and this was when Dream Factory had a cafe, and we used to go into the cafe all the time. I was just super curious about what they were doing, and everyone was always talking about them, what they were doing, how they were like the go-to content creation space, especially within startups. And I just knew that I wanted to then at this stage move into a much more creative career, something that was much more brand focused. And an opportunity came up, and at the time I genuinely didn't think I was going to leave my other role. I was very happy and like could see where the company was going and wanted to be part of that journey. But the opportunity came up at Dream Factory, and I just unfortunately couldn't say no. So I've now been here for 6 months.
I love the fact that the way you came across it and the fact you heard about it was from walking past it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's a cool space. I've been to it, and it's like obviously the cafe like is a nice little thing, and the name as well is cool. But what like just fill in that gap between how did you go from a recruiting sales role into really working out that like, okay, this content creation stuff is cool?
Do you know what? I don't think I have yet. I don't think I have worked it out. I think I still am working it out. So my role at Dream Factory is very agnostic. We obviously have the studio team who do the actual production side, but I'm within the sort of content strategy and membership side. So there's definitely still like sales elements to my role now. I think sales runs through everything as well, it even runs through content creation. Why do you do it? Is to like for brand awareness and to represent yourself. So I don't think I've necessarily made that jump at all. I'm still kind of in conversation with members, in conversations with other brands that want to work with us and learn how we can help scale their brand and take them to the next level. And then I just am super, super lucky that my actual day-to-day means that I'm doing content strategy within that and working out how you can take those brands to the next level, what Dream Factory, if Dream Factory is able to play a part in that. So yeah, I don't think I'm out of the sales, the funnel just yet.
If I can just push you on a couple of things there. Well, firstly, like your job title, content strategist, right? And you talk about content strategy quite flippantly there, but I'm probably quite ignorant when it comes to this stuff. So just in case anyone else is as well, what actually is the content strategy and like day-to-day stuff are you doing hour to hour?
Hour to hour, that's a great question. My job, I talked to my mum about this last week and she was like, honestly, darling, I have no idea what you actually do, because I will tell her every day what I'm up to and show her like little videos. So it can be anything from doing like sitting down with a brand, kind of very similar to the conversation we had where we sit down and kind of break out what your goals and how are you going to get there. That's probably the most like rudimentary side of things. And then you want to tie it into what platforms you're using, what that content's going to look like. Do you want it to be more user generated and rough and ready, or do you want it to be a little bit more polished? And then you'll also break down like a brand's profile, right? From whether they're luxury, whether they're like F&B, food and beverage, beauty, what sector they're in. And probably the simplest way of putting it is understanding a brand almost like they're your best friend, and understanding the customer like they're your best friend, and then translating it into what sort of content are they wanting to consume. And then of that you've got to break down their profiles, so like the generation, what sort of platforms are they most consuming on. And then the biggest thing is to work out whether, from my side, our team is actually the best suited to that, right? And work out whether the sort of content that we produce in the studio is actually best suited for what that consumer wants to see. So yeah, that's probably like a top level ramble of like what content strategy is. And then from that, we also need to review that with our brands of like, for example, a couple of our brands, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name drop, but a few of our brands have like renewed with us for a third year in a row. And the content that they were producing 3 years ago, before they'd even done like their first like fundraise, and now they're doing like fundraisers for like 1 million, the content is going to be completely different 3 years on of how they want to be represented. Or if they're going into a US market, what's that going to look like compared to a UK market? So it's just kind of trying to be as observant as possible, understanding the consumer, and then breaking that down into what content they want to see, really.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, we know from our previous conversation with you that you're pretty good at your job, but when you're describing it there, you definitely sound like you know what you're talking about as well. But how is the question I have? Like, how would you become good at that? And even treating a brand like a best friend, right? How do you come to have the skill set to be able to do your job well?
So one thing is I got a qualification. Like I did a 3-month course. I don't know if you call it a qualification really, but I got a certificate and my mum was really happy about it. So I call it a qualification. So yeah, I studied. I also am like surrounded by content creators every single day, and we're in the office 5 days a week as well, which obviously really helps. So there's continuous talking about a brand's goals. And then the third thing I would say is just ask as many questions as you possibly can, and then you also start as you start to educate yourself on what a good content strategy looks like. You then know the types of questions and the types of questions to push on. My favorite question to ask is like, what do you want to achieve as a brand? And then if you were to achieve that, what sort of impact would that have? So for example, I was having a conversation with a brand recently and I said, well, what's your biggest pain point? And they said turnaround of content, because our retailers are asking us for content and we're not allowed to turn it around, and we're not able to turn it around quick enough. And so I said, okay, well, what would happen if we were able to speed that process up for you? And they go, well, we'd get more retail space, we'd be a preferred product, and we'd get much more like advertising within the actual physical stores. We'd be able to do activations. And then very similar to what you two are doing, right? And you're asking me a question and I answer, and then you go, can I push you on that? Like, you just have to do that, but just within the content space, and just keep asking questions. And my dad always used to say to me, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I just think that's like the key. Working on a podcast, or you're working in sales, or you're trying to do a content strategy, you should be listening twice as much as you should be talking. So yeah.
So good.
That's so good, and I love that last piece as well. So we're quite keen to do a little bit of like a role play of the like how you actually do, like how you visualize and how you talk about brands. I know we spoke at some point about our podcast, but we'd like to like just play out, because I think it gives people a really good idea of what your day-to-day life would be like as a content strategist. So if we came to you as the Path Less Chosen pod and said, as we kind of have done already,
Yeah.
how can we grow audience? What are some of the things you'd be asking us and taking us through to give us a good idea of where we can go?
Gosh, I'll have to get out that strategy I did for you and run through it. I don't know. That's a great question. I think basically how we break it down, right, was I was asking you kind of what your goals are and who your audience is and why you did it. Why is the big thing? Why are you actually like... Why are you bothering? Why are you taking time out of your day to create this podcast to appeal to this audience? And then when you can work out the why, it's like you can then scale it back and say, once you've worked out that why, what's the running theme of those comms that you want to be putting out into the world? Like, do you actually want it to be about you, or do you want it to be about the person that you're interviewing? And when we kind of spoke about even your relationship, like you two being mates, you're both in a similar situation of like working out where you want to be, and then one of you's obviously working in no offense, Sol, but like quite a unique industry and self-employed, and then obviously Sol, you're working in a consultancy. That's such like a pinnacle of why you're doing this, and that's how you maximize it on content. Like your relationship, everything you should do in your comms and like the way that you're representing your brand should come back to that why. And then from that, you can break it down into Instagram, like TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. How are you going to represent that why on a different platform, appealing to a different audience?
Okay, so sorry to interrupt the podcast. We just wanted to say that if you could give us any sort of interaction on our Instagram, which is the Path Less Chosen Pod, at the Path Less Chosen Pod on Instagram, and if you could give us any sort of interaction, that is a like, a share, a save, a comment, anything, we will definitely respond, and we would be very, very appreciative as it helps get this podcast to as many people as possible.
Amazing. Yeah, I find that so interesting, and thank you for that. I think what's also important is you also work with a lot more interesting clients, right? Maybe tell us a little bit more about like the more exciting side and the kind of stuff that you've done. I know things from like L'Oreal to Bradley Walsh, right?
Well, Bradley Walsh was literally just me chasing him down the street because my mum's a massive Chase fan, and I was like, oh, selfie. But we do get really cool people in our studios. We're very, very lucky, and it brought. We've got such a broad range. So we're industry agnostic. So we do everything from your sort of food and beverage and beauty, and we often also get quite well represented in the product photography side of things. But we do a lot of like SaaS platforms, recruitment agencies, a lot on thought leadership. Men's mental health is quite a common one that we work on as well. And also one thing that we've seen a massive uptake in recently is financial literacy within like your 20s and people coming forward and trying to educate people like Abigail Foster or Millennial Money. The content they're making I absolutely love. So that's the kind of agnostic range. We had Ross Kemp come into the studios a little while back, which I think quite a lot of the guys were quite excited about. Yeah, it is super interesting, and I think that's what makes it the job so varied. Like that's what makes it so interesting. Because you're working out where that brand's going to take it. Are we just doing product photography today for you to do your launch into America, for example, or are we doing like a thought leadership piece on why someone set up a men's mental health charity, and understanding that tonality. And some of the stuff we did recently was like like working with Squashies, like the little sweets, and working out some product photography for there. And you go from ideation all the way through to production, and you get to see end to end. So yeah, it is pretty cool, and it's also quite cool that I get to work with different sizes of brands. So from like talking to you guys, and then also being on a L'Oreal shoot, like I'm so lucky that I get to have these different conversations and talk to different types of people.
I assume you enjoy talking to us more than obviously the big brands, right? That's you're saying that.
Absolutely.
We're the ground, we're the grassroots people.
I think it also depends like what you're most interested in, right? Like I definitely align myself more to the tech space and the alcohol, food and beverage space, because that's my background, hospitality and tech. Whereas my colleague's background, she's worked for like the likes of Mary Claire, and she's done production on that side, so she's much more drawn to the beauty industry and the fashion industry as well, and she's so talented at it, and I'm not necessarily as educated on that side. So I think it's just like what you most enjoy talking about and who you most enjoy talking to, and then your job's just pretty good that way, right?
Yeah, definitely. How does it look like in terms of career progression? A lot of people that I think we speak to that wonder about maybe they take some kind of path less chosen, they want to know where it might eventually end up. Do you have like a 5-10 year plan with your career?
Yeah, I do. I personally would love to have my own hospitality space one day, and that's another massive benefit of working at Dream Factory of studios, right? Like we are essentially we're hosting this experience, and one thing that I'm most passionate about is customer experience and the way that you make someone feel when they're in your space. So I've definitely caught the bug from Dream Factory in that regard. What that might look like in the next 10 years leading up to that, I genuinely have no idea, and that's the beauty of startups, and that's why I've always kind of appreciated working in the startup world, because I know I've said it once, I'll say it again, no day looks the same when you work in a startup. You're doing so much. I've worked here for 6 months, and I've worked on things like running events, hiring processes, content strategy, sales, like working on our processes and what that looks like internally, having discussions with like our founder about what the growth is going to look like for the company in the next 6 months. There's not many places where you can actually experience that and have so much visibility, and then not necessarily even feel like there's a hierarchy. It's very sort of like horizontal communication, if that's a phrase, I don't know. Yeah, that's what, from a career progressions perspective, is what appeals to me so much, because I'm not really sure. I know in 10 years time I would like to be running my own business, and being able to work in an entrepreneurial startup environment where you're learning so much, you're seeing like everything behind the scenes, and you're also working with other entrepreneurial people that would be absolutely buzzing to see you set your own thing up. Our founder's like super supportive of that, of like, he knows one day that we might want to do that, so why wouldn't we want to learn from him, someone that's already done it? So in the short term, no, I don't really know what my career progression is going to look like, but I know that I'm definitely in the right place.
Just to put myself into the shoes of someone maybe listening to this who is within the corporate world and is maybe thinking, I want to go and do something else that I enjoy more, but I don't have an idea in the back of my head of maybe founding a business, or I don't know what exactly. Hearing you talk, maybe they might have had a light bulb moment thinking, okay, maybe the place to start then is going into a startup, which is a bit more exciting. I guess you've got more responsibility, right? So I'd just be interested, for someone maybe thinking that now, would you advise them, yeah, I would recommend going into a startup, that's a good place to start? And maybe is there any words of warnings that when they're looking at startups to join that they should be aware of, that you've learned from your experience?
I think Jumpstart taught me a lot of like what to look out for. Jumpstart have got an incredible network, and anyone within their network I would definitely trust. I think what Matthew Kabir and Emily and everyone in the team has built out is super trustworthy, and I feel like very supported by them, even though like I'm not necessarily as closely connected with my current role. Would I advise it? Yes, 100% I would advise it, dependent on the type of person I was talking to. If you want structure and you want someone, and you want that clear career path of like, okay, if I hit this target, this will mean this, or if I bill a certain amount of money, then I know where I stand, startups are probably not for you. If you want to be able to be as much of a sponge and learn as much as possible, and you also really enjoy the unpredictability of what a company can turn into, then yeah, absolutely I would recommend that. I was very lucky that in my last startup the startup was turning into a scale up and had been going for sort of 7 years and was about to ramp up really, really quickly. So I was able to get educated on what a business looks like from that perspective. And now I'm in a company that's been going for 3 years, and just having that exposure of these completely different environments, but the same thing running through is everyone's just trying to work it out and do the best they possibly can. So yes, I would recommend it if you are quite entrepreneurial, and also if you are entrepreneurial but you don't quite know what you want to do, because you get to try everything. You get to try literally every job role there is. But if you need that structure and you need those targets, and if you need that visibility on what the next 6 months is going to look like and that security, then I probably wouldn't suggest it.
Yeah, I love that. I think we've spoken quite a lot about that actually we sometimes like get tricked into being very anti-corporate on this podcast, which is we're actually trying to move more into just basically a decision basis of like, you're this type of person, you're not going to enjoy a corporate, and we get quite a lot of those people on, but actually there's a lot of people who are like, they are suited for a big corporate, and I think it's really nice that like you touched on that right at the end there, just because it is really about what you're like as a person and whether you should fit in that environment or not. Love it. And we will do the final question, which we give to all our guests. So if you could go back to a time, perhaps when you were sat in that recruiting job that you weren't liking, what is one thing you do the same, one thing you do differently, and one thing that you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
One thing I do the same, I do recruitment. I do the whole process all over again. I know maybe what I said earlier sounds like I was proper like slagging it off, but the amount I learned and the resilience that it built up, and also the managers that I had were really, really incredible. And I think it's one of those things that has definitely set me up for life and taught me how to really manage my own expectations and never assume anything and never take anything for granted. And yeah, I definitely do recruitment again. The one thing I would do differently, I probably wouldn't go to university again. If I could have my friends from university, I probably wouldn't do that again, because I think for me personally, in the degree that I did, it hasn't contributed to where I am today. And I've definitely learnt more in the corporate world than I did in academia. Degrees can definitely like set you up for life. For me personally, I probably wouldn't do that again. And what would I say to myself? I would probably say do your research into the industries that you love, because I think from my school days and from university, and what you two talk about all the time is this whole you've got to work for a consultancy or the Big Four or an engineer or a doctor or whatever. I knew I was very commercially minded, but I was never aligned to anything that wasn't within those stereotypical fields. So I would probably say do your research into the arts and learn about what roles there are. For example, I wanted to go to drama school when I was 18, but I knew that for me personally, that industry just wasn't, the instability and like the competitiveness of that industry wasn't something I was well suited to. If I'd known that there were things like, I don't know, how to be an agent, or how to be like in charge of press for like theatre tours and things like that, I definitely would have probably felt more comfortable going into those industries. I just was not educated enough. So that would be my...
I love that. I find your answer to what you do the same particularly interesting, like given all the downsides you gave us of recruitment. It's so important to hear that you would still go back and do it because you felt like you learned so much there, right? So thank you so much for sharing that, Immy. I think overall, Jumpstart have set the bar very high for their recommendations. So
Thank you. That's
we're going to have to see how the rest of them do. But no, seriously, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing that with us. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Really interesting podcast. Obviously, very cool to get our first Jumpstarter on. Clearly played a massive part in developing her, saving her from a career that she didn't like. But that almost brings me on to my first takeaway, which is so fascinating at the end that she said she would still go into recruiting. And I think that's a massive part of like understanding how certain parts of your journey play into the skill set you have. And without doubt, her ability to cold call, her ability to sell, her ability to engage with random people are like functions of her being able to have that, or functions of her recruiting past. So I liked the fact that she'd really learned from her journey, but appreciated that her journey had multi skills within it that had played into how well she's doing now.
Yeah, lovely. No, I agree. It took me a bit by surprise that she was still going to recruiting, but her reasons for doing so I think are really important to learn from. My takeaway is more of like a practical bit of advice rather than like a snippet of wisdom. But I think the purpose of this podcast is obviously showing and telling people listening that how they might be able to go down their own path less chosen. And I think it was just interesting to hear her speak as quite a unique guest that I don't really think we've had before, where she was in a job she didn't enjoy, and rather than going and doing like her own thing or anything like that, she went into a startup, which is quite different. We've not had anyone that's done that before. And I think the way she kind of explained it, and to figure out if that's the right option for you, knowing if you're the right personality, are you entrepreneurial, can you go down a little bit of a riskier thing, that would you be happy with doing so? I think it's just quite a good practical advice that if you don't know exactly what you want to do, you don't have your own business idea or whatever, maybe just start having a look at some startups that potentially are offering jobs that, something like for her and her creativity, they offer you a chance to exercise your passion, learn some stuff, and then eventually in 5 years time she might have her own business, right?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's exactly what Jumpstart have really shed light on, is that there's all these startups and these jobs at startups that at uni we had absolutely no idea existed. And I do genuinely, I'm not just saying this because we're doing a collab episode with them, but I do genuinely think they've shifted a lot of people's mindset into like, it's not corporate or entrepreneur. There's actually this kind of middle ground where you can flex your muscle without having to go to the corporate or take on all the risk. Lovely. Last one for me would be, I love the amount she speaks about learning. At all points she was like, well, for example, in recruiting there was learning, in startups there was learning, and she really appreciates that when you're young, being in an environment where you can learn is so useful. She spoke about content creators being surrounded by her all day, or her being surrounded by content creators all day. I love that, and I think it's such an important thing that we get from all our guests, is how much they've learned from people in their surroundings.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, she came up with some golden nuggets, the stuff that we love hearing, like be a sponge, ask as many questions as you possibly can. But the message that I really liked is that, to do with the learning as well, that her curiosity for learning, that curiosity began just by the fact that when she was walking past Dream Factory, she was curious about what they were doing, right? And just by that curiosity there, she managed to get a job with them, and now she's in that job and she continues to learn. Curious, she continues to ask loads of questions and is a sponge, and I think it's exactly why she's so good at what she does, to be honest.
Yeah, lovely stuff. Okay, so to wrap that up, first takeaway was appreciate every part of your journey. The second one was consider startups, it's not just entrepreneur or corporate. And then the third one is learning and curiosity for learning.
Yeah, brilliantly summed up. No, really good episode. I think firstly, for anyone listening, it's worth checking out the Dream Factory stuff just to see the kind of work that she does do. But also thank you so much to Jumpstart for recommending her. She was a really good guest, and I know we've mentioned it a few times throughout the pod, but it's worth checking out what Jumpstart do, as it might help you down your path chosen.
Yeah, buzzing. Looking forward to getting the rest of the Jumpstarters on, and thank you very much to them for helping us with this pod. Looking forward to the next episode. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that podcast. And please do, if you have the time, go to our Instagram at the Path Less Chosen Pod. Give us an interaction, like, share, subscribe, save any of the posts you can. It's a massive help to the pod doing it, and we'd be very, very appreciative.